All right, so looking at this class starter, yesterday what we focused on was function compositions. Really wasn't all that new to us, but then we also looked at inverses, and that was kind of a new concept. So on Monday, you're going to have a quiz on compositions and on inverses, okay? So let's kind of be prepared for that. And this assignment, along with your homework the other day, or last night, will definitely help you with it. So you're given three functions, f, h, and g, and you're asked to find each of the following. So for number one, you'll notice you have numbers to work with. So we can find f of 2. So f of 2 means that we're going to go to the function f, and we're going to replace x with 2. So that's going to be the square root of 2 times 2 is 4, and 4 plus 8 will be 12. So f of 2 is the square root of 12. Then let's find g of 5. G of 5, we're on the function g over here. 5 times 5 is 25. Minus 12 would be 13. Agreed? And so g of 5 is 13. So now we're going to find h of 13. And that means we're going to go to the function h. We're going to plug 13 in for x. And what does that become? 4 over 23. All right, so we end up with the square root of 12 plus 4 over 23. And I don't see anything that we can do with that, so we'll just leave that as our answer. Yeah, Juliana? Yes, leave it as a fraction, not a decimal. Good. Everybody good on number one? Okay. That was what we were kind of used to already with function compositions. So 2 and 3 then get to where we're actually taking the entire function and plugging in to the other function. So here where we have f of g of x, what is g of x? 5x minus 12. So what this means is we're going to replace g of x with 5x minus 12, and then we're going to plug that into f. So we're going to go to the f function, and where there's an x right here, that x is going to get replaced with 5x minus 12. So we're going to write the function f, which is the square root of 2x plus 8. But in place of x, what am I putting in there? 5x minus 12. So where there was an x, now we have that 5x minus 12, which is the g of x function. And then we'll simplify this, distribute the 2 in, that's going to be 10x minus 24 plus 8, which is minus 16. And that's as far as we can go. I can't pick and choose. I can't just say, oh, the square root of 16 is 4, but that's attached to a minus sign. So I can't pull that 4 on the outside because then there would be minus nothing. Okay, so you can't just pick and choose to do square roots of individual pieces. You have to do the square root of the whole thing. So, in this case, we'll just leave it as the square root of 10x minus 16. And then for number 3, it's h of g of x, which g of x is 5x minus 12. So we're going to take 5x minus 12 and plug it in to our function h. And our function h is 4 over x plus 10. But in place of x, what am I putting? Okay, so where the x was right here, now I've put that 5x minus 12 in place. And I'm going to combine my like terms. So I'm going to be left with 4 over 5x minus 2. And that's all I'm going to do. Okay. Why can I not simplify the 4 and the 2? It's got to go into the 5 also. It's got to go into all 3, and there's not a number that goes into all 3. Okay. Everybody good on 1, 2, and 3? Okay, so then 4 and 5 asks you to find the inverse and then identify the domain and range of the original function and the inverse. So for 4, if I'm going to find the inverse, what do I do? Well, before we get the y by itself, what do you do? Switch, right? An inverse switches the x and y coordinates. It switches the domain and the range. So x and y get flipped. So now it's going to be x equals 6y minus 9. And then we got to get y by itself. So how do I do that? Add 9. And then divide by 6. So we're going to have x plus 9 over 6. And that's equal to the inverse. And we're going to label it with that proper notation. So we want to then find the domain of y and the range of y. And then we want to find the domain of the inverse and the range of the inverse. So go back to the original function y. What kind of function is that? Linear. So what does that mean about its domain? All real numbers. If that's the domain of y, then it becomes the range of the inverse. Because remember, those get flipped. And what about the range of the line? All real numbers also. And so that becomes the domain of the inverse. And even though the inverse is a fraction, does that fraction have any x's in the denominator? No, so there's not going to be anything that's going to cause us to get a 0 in the denominator. So that domain would be all real numbers, which is what we got here. Okay? Everybody good on 4? All right, those of you that are leaving at 9:15, y'all can go ahead. And then for number 5, same thing. We got to find the inverse first. So to find the inverse, we switch x and y. So we're going to have x equals the square root of y minus 4 plus 2. And then we got to get y by itself. So what am I going to do to get y by itself? Well, we already did that. So we switched x and y. So now we got to get this y by itself. So move the 2 over. So we're going to have x minus 2 equals the square root of y minus 4. Then what? How do you get rid of the square root? Good. You square it. So that's going to be x minus 2 squared equals y minus 4. And then we'll add the 4 over. So we have x minus 2 squared plus 4, and that's our inverse. So let's find the domain of y and the range of y. And then we'll find the domain of f inverse and the range of f inverse. All right, so let's go to the original. What do we know about that domain if we have a square root? It's a half a parabola graphically. But what do we say about square roots when it comes to domain? What cannot happen? Right, you can't have imaginary. What's going to make that imaginary? When does that happen? Well, whenever we get a negative inside that square root, right? So we've got to avoid negatives inside of the square root. So that means either I can't have numbers less than 4 or bigger than 4. We got to decide which one. So let's say if we were to plug in a number like 5, would I get a negative inside that square root? What if I plugged in 3? Yeah, I would. So that tells me I cannot have numbers less than 4. Because then I'm going to get a negative inside that square root. Okay? So I can have numbers that are bigger than or equal to 4. Okay? So that's my domain of the original function. I can have numbers bigger than or equal to 4 because that's going to make sure that I get a positive value inside that square root. Anything less than 4 is going to give me a negative. If that's the domain of y, what does that become? Right, the range of the inverse. So the range of our inverse is y has to be greater than or equal to 4. Right, because remember, they switch. Now look at your inverse. Does it have a denominator? Does it have a square root? No. So what does that mean about its domain? All real numbers. And so that's the range over here. Okay? Am I good on your class starter? And take out your homework from last night. Don't have the answers to them, but were there any in particular that you want to go over besides 15? I know you want to do that one. Anything like 2, 4, or 6?
We go over number 6.
Number 6? All right, so looking at the homework from last night, number 6, it asks you to find f of g of h of -3. Okay, so there's a lot going on there. But remember, with composition functions, we work from the inside out. So let's start by finding h of -3. So I'm going to go to the function that's labeled h. 5x plus 2 over 4, and I'm going to replace x with -3. So 5 times -3 plus 2 is so -13 over 4. So that's h of -3. So now I can come back over here, and this part right here, h of -3, is really -13 over 4. So now I've got to find g of -13 over 4. So I'll go to the function g. I'm going to plug that in for x. I'm going to need a little help from you here, your calculator. So you just type all this into your calculator. 4 parentheses, -13 divided by 4, close parentheses, and square. And minus 9 times parentheses -13 over 4. Close that parentheses and then add 2. And what did we get? Mari got 147 over 2. Anybody want to confirm that?
Somebody confirm.
Good, that's what he got. Yep, that's what I got too. All right, so we're good there. So that's g of -13 over 4. So this gets replaced with that. So now we're finding f of 147 over 2. And so we'll go to the function f, and that's going to be 3 times in place of x. I'll put 147 over 2 minus 2, and we'll evaluate that, and that'll be our answer. Okay? So we just had to work our way from the inside out, evaluating all along. All right, any other questions through 10? Number 8. All right, you're asked to find f of g of x. So that means that we're going to take g of x, which is what? And we're going to plug it into the function f. And f is 4x minus 8. So it's going to be 4 in place of x. We're going to put all of this. then minus 8. Okay, so we went to the function f, which was 4x minus 8, and in place of x, we put that g of x function. And then we'll simplify, so I'll distribute in the 4. That's going to be 4x squared minus 12x, and then 4 times 7 is 28, and 28 minus 8 is 20. The instruction said to state the domain, and remember with domain, you're looking for denominators and square roots. Does this have a denominator?
No.
Does it have a square root?
No.
So what's the domain? Good. Any other questions through 10? All right, what about through 14? Not good. So you want to do 15? All right, 15 asks you to find f of x plus h minus f of x all over h. Okay? So all this is several different pieces. We got to first start by finding f of x plus h. Okay, and we're given that f of x is 2x plus 5. So what am I going to do when I have f of x plus h? Good. 2, instead of this x, what am I going to put? I'm going to put x plus h, because where there normally is an x, now I have an x plus h. And then plus 5. Okay? So instead of it being 2x plus 5, now instead of x, I have x plus h. So this piece right here is that. So I'm going to have 2 times x plus h plus 5. And then minus, well, what's f of x?
2x plus 5.
Okay, 2x plus 5. All over h. Okay, so I just did f of x plus h, which is this, f of x, which is this, all over h. Then I can simplify it. I can distribute in that 2. I can distribute in that negative. What happens in that numerator?
2x cancel out. 5 cancel out.
So then I'm left with 2h over h. H is canceled. So we just get 2. There you go. And believe it or not, you just did some calculus right there. Whoa. No doubt. No doubt. Any other questions on this homework? All right, quiz on Monday, so be prepared. I'll send you a reminder, and I'll write out all the answers to this, and I'll put them on the website as well.